everyone. My name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today, I want to talk about yet more misinformation that is being spread online. I know it might not seem like it, but I was on a little bit of a Twitter break to avoid the worst of the Pride Month discourse we get during June. So when I returned to my regularly scheduled browsing in July, it sort of felt like walking into the room being on fire. And I'm not sure if it was the heat wave the West Coast has been experiencing, keeping everyone inside and on their phones, but people were activated. They were mad. And one of the first pieces of discourse I had the displeasure of interacting with was this: you need to take pills to not contract HIV. You can't just not have sex with people who have HIV. And that by itself is maybe eye-roll worthy. I certainly wouldn't make a whole video bashing someone because they don't understand what PrEP is. But nah, as always, it gets worse. The quote retweets are full of who are desperately making excuses as to why they have to F everybody they know and how bigoted it is for me to even question it. Man, I solved this problem by just getting a normal girlfriend and having a normal monogamous relationship. And is there a lot going on in that response? And it would have been great to see this just be like one ignorant person getting read to filth in the replies and retweets, but much to my shock, other people were backing them up. We call this behavior degenerate for a reason, not necessarily because it's morally degenerate, although that can be the case, but such behaviors literally lead to degeneration of one's health. There's a reason why 50+% of women have some form of STD. Citation needed on that one, big boy. What do you mean there's a reason why 50+% of women have an STD? Let's unpack that one a little more, shall we? Who are the women getting all of these STDs from? Are they just getting punished by God for their sexual sin, perhaps? Why is this phrased like every STI is permanent? This sounds like a subliminal reference to the incel talking point about how all women sleep around with as many alpha chads as possible and they get ruined in the process with being tainted by disease. Well, somehow, not mentioning for that claim to be true, the alpha chads would also have to be tainted by disease. Funny how they never bring that part up. By the way, I could not find a single stat anywhere that got close to half of all women have an STD. STIs are on the rise across most demographics due to a lot of reasons like antibiotic resistance, stigma around barrier use and testing, and how common asymptomatic infections are, but nothing on that level. What I did find was CDC data suggesting that 1 in 5 people have an STI. About 50% of all new STI cases are obtained by young people ages 15 to 24. And a 2004 study suggested about 24% of sexually active girls between 19 and 14 years of age had an STI. The most common one? HPV. I imagine a more recent study since the widespread introduction of Gardasil in 2007, which prevents HPV, would likely show different numbers. It is true, though, that on average, heterosexual women are more likely to have an STI than their male counterparts. Is that because they're sleeping around with any alpha who will have them? Not likely. According to Dr. Hunter Hansfield, an expert in STIs, quote, at any one exposure, a susceptible woman is more likely to catch it than a susceptible man. That's because the lining of the vagina is thinner and more delicate, so it's easier for bacteria and viruses to penetrate and take hold. Once there, the moist environment of the vagina is perfect for growth. And this interview gave me a hint where this 50% stat might be coming from. Hansfield says that the data may only reflect half of all STI cases due to reporting issues. So if you take that 24% and double it, you get pretty close to 50%. Who cares if that data is 20 years old before we had a vaccine for one of the most common STIs? Though Hansfield was careful to add, we also know more than half of the women who get infected with chlamydia had only a single sexual partner in the last year. I doubt someone in the manosphere would believe any reporting about how many sexual partners a woman claims to have, but yeah. The reason women have more STIs has much more to do with biology than hypergamy. And actually, because this response did it too, let's have just a little mini sidebar moment about terms like degenerates and the R slur. I am not sure exactly why, but people are trying to make these words a thing again, and can we just, not do that? In my opinion, this is some 4chan neo-Nazi type language, and there is no reason why we as queer people should be adopting these terms. We're not reclaiming any of them at this point. When it gets used exclusively as an insult towards others as a way to shame them, that's not reclamation. We are just doing the queer phobes' job for them at some point. We might as well be going, yep, they're correct about us. A lot of queer people are degenerate sex monsters. What are you doing? Please just stop. It's not cute. It's not helping, especially because these terms, in my opinion, are also being used just as much by people who despise women and queer people. And I think that is well evidenced by the 2 posts I just read. But that's just my view on it. Sidebar over. Let's get back to talking about the real pressing matter at hand. The idea that the solution to HIV is not medication, but being a normal person with a normal monogamous girlfriend and just so many things. Where do I start? I'd like to start, actually, by tagging their stated idea that being a normal and thus good and correct person means being monogamous. And some people still don't think that bias against polyamorous people and open relationships is real. But maybe where I want to dive in first is talking about what pill the original poster is referring to and why they're having such a strong reaction in the first place. I saw at least one reply from a smaller account, though I can't find it now, that said something along the lines of, yeah, right? Wasn't the only way to not get HIV is to not have unprotected sex with someone who is HIV positive, like the first thing that we learned in school? Why are they acting like a pill is a good solution? And I am potentially about to rock this person's world with the revelation that the sex ed you received in 2009 as a middle schooler was possibly not completely up to date and comprehensive. Of course, you can get HIV through more than just sex, so let's just jot that one down real quick. Part of the reason why HIV and AIDS were not massive issues to the general public at first was the idea that it was just a sexual punishment for the sins of gay men, that only gay men could get it by having their bad, naughty, ungodly relationships. And then hemophiliac children and straight people started getting it, and that suddenly shifted a lot of folks' perspective on it, but not entirely. There is still a huge stigma against HIV, in part because it can be contracted through sexual contact. You can see this reflected in the common parlance people use when talking about STI testing. To not have a positive result makes you clean, implying that having a positive result would make you dirty and unclean, tainted. This mentality keeps people from getting tested and from asking others for test results. People tend to assume that bad things happen to bad people and good things happen to good people. This is called the just world fallacy. But life isn't like that. Some people just get lucky, some don't. Bad things happen to good people, and using a barrier and getting tested regularly is going to do a lot more to reduce your risk than feeling like you're a good person. Now, I can empathize with someone saying, but that's what they taught us in school, to an extent. I know when I was in school, the message about HIV was, you can get it through more than just sex, but the only way to make sure you won't catch it through sex is by never having it. Although, to be honest, I don't think they were that explicit at first. Like most sex ed, a lot of it was fairly euphemistic. For example, they would refer to dirty needles, but my little 9-year-old brain didn't realize that meant needles that have been used by someone who is HIV positive. I thought that they meant any dirty needle could give you HIV, like one that had just been on the ground or gotten dust on it. I remember being so worried anytime I'd get a shot because I thought, oh no, what if that needle is dirty by accident? That went on for a couple of years until I had more education. However, even then, they didn't talk about other ways to protect against transmission because those methods weren't yet available. If you're my age or older, chances are you wouldn't have learned about something called PrEP because it wasn't available back then. It came out in 2012, and I don't know if they started to include it in the curriculum since then. I have a feeling that abstinence-only states were not super jazzed at the idea of adding HIV prevention medication to their lesson plans because it was such a good way, they thought, of keeping people from having sex if they could scare them about the prospect of HIV. And even now, it's not very well known outside of the LGBT plus community. So, in case you haven't heard about it before either, what is PrEP? PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis. It is a general term for medications used to prevent the spread of a disease to people who are not yet infected. Vaccines are actually a form of PrEP, but in common vernacular, PrEP is generally taken to refer to the drugs used to prevent the spread of HIV. Typically, this is in the form of a daily pill, though there is also a bi-monthly injection called, I think it's Epritude, and a vaginal ring. PrEP is 99% effective at preventing the spread of HIV through sex, and almost 75% effective at preventing spread through injection drug use. It is hard to overstate how life-changing this has been for people. The CDC estimates that between 2017 and 2021 alone, overall infections decreased by 12%. In the UK, the fall has been even more precipitous, with new infections amongst gay and bisexual men going from 3,000 in 2011 to an estimated 670 in 2021. In fact, in the UK, new infections amongst heterosexual people have been outpacing new infections amongst gay men for several years. The decrease in the UK and the US can be directly attributed to the widespread uptake of PrEP in the LGBT plus community, though there remains a large gap in who has access to PrEP, especially in the US. Over 35% of those who could benefit from PrEP have a prescription for it. In the UK, the number is even higher, with 85% of those who could benefit getting a prescription. But the success of PrEP hasn't just been in reducing HIV transmission rates. As one article reported, quote, "In study after study, gay and bisexual men reported that it has freed them from the fear and anxiety once endemic to sex. They feel they have greater control over their sex lives. They feel proud of the small part they play in curbing the epidemic. They are less likely to rule out sex or relationships with HIV-positive people. As one study participant told Canadian researchers, sex has been liberating again thanks to PrEP. The physical, mental, and emotional toll PrEP has helped to relieve is incalculable." So, knowing how fantastic PrEP is at improving health outcomes and people's ability to have loving relationships and a better experience of sex, you might be able to understand my reaction to someone acting dismissive at best towards it. But there is something I've left out. This whole, OMG, why don't you just avoid having sex with HIV-positive people? That take did not come out of nowhere. It was actually a quote retweet to someone stating they take pills every day because someone else accused them of perpetuating the AIDS epidemic. Because they said that sex can happen between friends and doesn't have to be this all-important, super romantic thing. Oh boy, I don't even know, I don't know what to do at this point, y'all, but let's try to break it down. The full original tweet said, quote, realizing that sex doesn't have to be this sacred, all-important thing and can instead just be an expression of affection between friends who are dear to one another is honestly the most life-changing realization for me, surpassed only by the realization that I'm a girl. This is a good sentiment. Everyone has their own relationship with sex. For some, it really, really is deeply important that they only want to share this with one person. For others, it's not like that, and that's okay. But that is not the message other people receive. No, instead, this was somehow taken as a glowing endorsement of hookup culture, wanton STI transmission, and meaningless sex that supports the patriarchy. None of that's true. Having emotionally connected sex with close friends, which is what that post is about, is not meaningless. Hookup culture is about having one-off and or completely non-committal sex with people who are often strangers. Again, still not the same as connected sex with a friend. And thirdly, no, this does not implicitly mean wanton STI transmission of the highest order. Remember that just world fallacy I mentioned before? That's very much in play here. The thinking goes something like this. I am a good, clean, normal person who only has sex with other good, clean, normal people. Therefore, I will not get an STI, unlike those bad, wrong people who have too much sex with other bad, wrong people. Purity culture is a hell of a drug. It somehow makes people think they are virtuous and immune to disease if they don't have sex outside of a committed monogamous relationship. You know, having a normal girlfriend. But if you are a monogamous person, you can still have multiple sexual partners over your lifetime. In fact, you can even have multiple close together during the same year. According to CDC data, over 50% of heterosexual people between 25 and 49 have had between 2 and 9 sexual partners. Another roughly 30% of men and women have had 10 to 15 or more. It's also worth remarking, because now we have the full context here, that I imagine a lot of the ire that came out because of this particular post was likely because the original person who was sharing a nice story about having connected sex with friends was a trans woman, and we know how certain parts of the internet feel about trans women, and it's very, very sad to see, but I imagine that is also a factor here as well. There's just transphobia, queerphobia, like phobia and bias against open relationships and polyamory. It's just all over the place. But I doubt that all of the people leaving comments like, have you thought about not having random sex and making sure you don't sleep with AIDS-infected people? This isn't a hard concept. Are all pure, chaste virgins who waited until their wedding night. In fact, the kind of monogamy that many people practice, serial monogamy, is rife with opportunities for STI transmission. Honestly, it's kind of the perfect storm for STI transmission. First of all, you have a lack of sex ed, which means people don't know what common STIs look like or what their symptoms are, because they probably got scared by the worst photos of them imaginable. They don't know that many infections are actually silent and pass asymptomatically. Purity culture comes in and influences them to think that good means clean, and they assume that because they've never had any symptoms, they can never ever have ever had anything. No one gets tested because it's shameful and awkward. Even people who do get tested, they don't get tested for everything, and they may go years between tests. They're also unlikely to share their results or have a frank conversation about sex. Only an abysmal 30% of people think it's appropriate to talk about your sexual history, including your health, in the first month of a relationship. Given the monogamous heterosexual standard is often having sex by the third date, or it means you're not into that person. That does not leave a whole lot of space between the time it suddenly becomes acceptable to talk about sex and when you're having it. And if people do talk about it, they aren't likely to share results beyond just like, yeah, I totally got tested. I promise I'm clean, bro. With attitudes like this, I'm not surprised that normal monogamous heterosexual people are starting to overtake the stats on new HIV cases. Moreover, and this is the real kicker, there is not any data to suggest that having a higher number of sexual partners increases your risk of STIs. The number of partners you have on its own doesn't matter. It's your behavior that does. But for some reason, we gotta shame people for doing exactly what they should be doing to keep themselves and other people safe. I assume that's easier than having to look in the mirror and ask yourself, when was the last time you got tested? Or talked about results? Have you always been consistent in using barriers? Have you never had a condom break? Because I suspect the answer may not align with some folks' good, clean, proper self-image. And just to compare and contrast for funsies, let's talk about what people typically do in the polyamorous world by comparison. Since, the only way to avoid disease is by being a good monogamous person, allegedly, and also being cis and straight and all of that stuff. But having been both monogamous and polyamorous in my life, I feel qualified to talk about them both. In polyamory, everything is much more openly talked about. Current partners, recent past partners, test results. We have concepts like fluid bonding and sexual networks to help us more accurately understand our respective risks. Most people with higher levels of risk, such as people who engage in casual sex or sex while under the influence, get tested much more regularly. But routine testing is done about every 6 months to a year. Many folks have one partner they have fluid bonded to, who they do not use barriers with, but they use barriers with everyone else and exchange testing results. We understand that by swapping fluids with someone, you are functionally swapping fluids with everyone else they have ever had unprotected contact with. Of course, things still happen. People forget to disclose new risks, or the window of when people get testing done misalign with incubation periods and give false negatives. But overall, it is a lot more open. It may be uncomfortable to think about, but serially monogamous people also have sexual networks. It's not just you and your girlfriend and that's it. It's you and your girlfriend and your ex you broke up with only a month ago, and your girlfriend's ex that she hooked up with a week before she met you and never told you about because she was embarrassed about going back to somebody that she dumped. And also your girlfriend's ex had a hookup with a stranger from a bar 2 weeks before any of that happened. Are you really sure you've never had sex with anyone who has ever had sex with someone who could be HIV positive? What, do you think you can just look at a person and know if they have HIV? Have you ever asked anyone directly? Is that even a conversation? More often, people are just assuming they haven't had sex with anyone who'd have HIV because they're not like that. They're not that type. It's very weird. HIV and AIDS are still largely seen as gay diseases. As one HIV-positive heterosexual woman from the UK put it, not only did I never consider I could be living with HIV, neither did my doctor. I had no idea that women could get HIV until I tested positive. If you have ever been sexually active, you should test regularly. It only takes once unprotected. Knowing your status is best for you and everyone else in your life. And no, by the way, close your legs, it's that simple, is not a solution. Abstinence can be part of a solution, especially if you are in a high-risk demographic and don't have access to medical care or regular testing. But it will never be the solution. I'm not sure how many decades we're going to keep having this fight for, but there is no way you are going to get all, 260 million something Americans who are adults to stop having sex. It's just not happening. And I think deep down, a lot of people saying this know that. They just like saying it because it lets them feel morally superior over everyone else. Not to mention, not all STI transmission is from consensual, unprotected sex. Assault still happens, stealthing happens, cheating, lying partners happen, heck, even accidental condom breaks happen. And in those scenarios, PrEP and regular testing can be life-saving. Also, for all of the people saying, well, just don't have sex with people who have HIV, or it's immoral for anyone with HIV to have sex or even be in a relationship with anyone else. In certain populations, HIV is pretty common. In 2001, before the introduction of PrEP, it was estimated that over a quarter of gay men living in San Francisco had HIV. I dare anyone who thinks HIV-positive people shouldn't have sex and no one should have sex with them to strut down to the Castro and start saying that to people's faces, because a disproportionate number of HIV-positive men are older folks who have survived the crisis, and many of them have long-term monogamous partners they like to do things with. Did you know that? Shock, horror, how dare they? Did you know it's possible to give informed consent to have sex or a long-term closed relationship with someone who has been diagnosed with HIV? Deriding them all as bug spreaders is inaccurate and gross, especially because 1, again, PrEP, 2, condom usage, and 3, this neat little thing called U=U. This video is getting pretty long, so I will keep my explanation for this short, but basically, if you have effective treatment for HIV, you can reduce your viral load so much that it becomes undetectable, and thus it is also untransmittable. That means people with HIV can have sex with their partners without having to worry about infecting them. It's actually kind of a miracle of modern medicine, but I'm gonna guess the masses on Twitter crying about PrEP don't know about that one. Honestly, all of the stats repeatedly show that polyamorous people and queer people have safer sex on average than their heterosexual monogamous counterparts. We talk more, we test more, we're more informed about the risks, we even use condoms more. About 50% of gay men report using condoms at least some of the time in the last year. Before PrEP, this peaked around 90%, according to some sources. Meanwhile, among heterosexual people, only 25 to 30% report using condoms some of the time in the last year. Add that on top of everything I just talked about with lack of communication and testing, and it's no wonder that heterosexual people are often spreading STIs far more than they realize. But you know what the cool thing is? We have the power to change that. We could start by making sure people get comprehensive, science-based sex ed. And for adults who didn't get that, we can preserve websites and articles that give accurate information. We can work to break down the stigma around testing and condom use. We can work to address our own internal biases and assumptions and stop ourselves when we think things like, well, but he doesn't seem like the kind of guy who'd have an STI. We can educate ourselves about options like PrEP, doxypep, and the HPV vaccine. By the way, if you were in the United States and 26 or younger, regardless of your gender or sex, you should get the HPV vaccine series. It's likely covered by your insurance still. But most importantly, we can help each other. Encourage your friends to get tested. Have frank conversations about it. Gently correct them if you hear them spread myths about STIs like women can't get HIV. And don't use STIs or being dirty or unclean as an insult. I know it feels like society is constantly moving 2 steps backward, but I really do think with some better education and social support, we can make a huge difference in at least our personal lives, if nothing else. And I feel like that's a pretty good place to start. So hopefully I have managed to end this video on a somewhat positive note. I really feel like, especially with the way that things are going, if you don't know, STIs are like up across the board. We're having more and more issues with antibiotic resistance, and especially falling condom usage is leading to way more transmission, including of quite serious ones like syphilis and HIV. And I think that we should really put in some work to try and push back against this. I know in the United States, with our terrible sex ed curriculum we have pretty much everywhere, it's going to be an uphill battle, but I do think we can do it. We can at least make some kind of dent on the people in our lives and for ourselves more than anything. So yeah, that's about what I wanted to talk about here. I can't believe how like comprehensive some of this stuff is, like the pushback against like sex in any form of media, pushback against like condom usage and like STI transmission preventing medication. Like it's everywhere. It's constant. I don't know what's happening. And yeah, hopefully we learned something here. I'd love to know your thoughts about this one in a comment down below. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, I make videos twice a week about all different topics about kink, BDSM, relationships, dating, sexuality, queer issues, all that good stuff. And if you want to support my channel, the best way you can do that is with Patreon. A link to that will be down below. Thank you all so much if you support me over there. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.